Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Creaks. Little Christmas has just passed in the mountains, but the cold hasn't let up. The roads are still icing over and the hollers are still dark. And these aren't warm stories about candles and windows and quiet hymns. These are the Appalachian nightmares people whisper about when winter refuses to move on. If you love true style horror with that this could really happen feeling, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which story got under your skin the most. And now, lock your doors, light a candle for the spirits, and let's begin. Running away is hard, but getting caught is worse, especially when the person catching you has a badge that says Guardian Youth Transport Services and a van with no handles on the inside. January 6th, 2019, Little Christmas. Most people don't even know that's a thing. But in the mountains of eastern Kentucky, some folks still celebrate it. The old Appalachian way, 12 days after the big day. Epiphany, if you want to get technical about it. I only know because my last foster mom, before everything went to hell, used to talk about it. She'd bake this special bread and leave a candle in the window, said it was to guide the wise men. I thought it was sweet. Back before I realized she was pocketing most of my state check and feeding me ramen 3 times a day. She's the reason I was running. I was 17. Sitting in the Greyhound station in Hazard, Kentucky, with a duffel bag that smelled like mildew and a one-way ticket to Cincinnati. The bus was supposed to leave at 6 p.m. It was now almost 8, and the LED board above the counter kept flashing delayed in angry red letters that made my head hurt. Outside, a blizzard was absolutely dumping snow. I mean, you couldn't see more than 10 feet past the window. Everything was just white noise and wind. The station itself was depressing. Fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry wasps. Linoleum floors that were supposed to be white, but had turned this sickly yellow color. The whole place smelled like burnt coffee and wet shoes. There were maybe a dozen plastic chairs bolted to the floor, half of them with rips in the seats where the foam was coming out. The station wasn't busy. There was an older lady with a Kroger shopping bag sitting near the vending machines, nodding off every few minutes. A guy in a stained Carhartt jacket was fully asleep against the wall, his mouth hanging open. And there was a clerk behind the counter, a thin guy with a scraggly beard who looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. He kept checking his phone, sighing, then checking it again. And then there was him. He was maybe 45, 50, average height but built. Not like gym built, more like the kind of solid you get from manual labor or military training. Something that sticks with you. He wore tactical pants, the kind with about 20 pockets, and a dark blue polo shirt with a logo I couldn't quite read from where I sat. Over that, a black puffer vest that looked expensive, clean shaven. Short hair, graying at the temples, wire-rimmed glasses. He looked official. That was the thing that got me. He looked exactly like someone you're supposed to trust. He'd been there when I arrived around 5 p.m. drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup, sitting 3 rows behind me, reading something on a tablet. I noticed him glancing over a couple times, but honestly, I didn't think much of it. People look, especially at a teenager traveling alone with a ratty duffel bag and wet sneakers that squeaked every time I moved. I figured I looked like exactly what I was, a runaway. But lots of kids take buses. Lots of kids look rough. I tried to tell myself I wasn't that obvious. I was watching the snow fall outside, hypnotized by it almost, trying to figure out if the bus was ever going to come, or if I was going to be stuck in this awful station all night when I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. The kind of footsteps that have a destination coming toward me. I turned, and he was standing right there. Close. Way too close. Like inside my personal space close, I could smell his cologne. Something woodsy and expensive. He smiled. It wasn't warm, it wasn't friendly, it was practiced, rehearsed, like he'd done it in a mirror. "Are you Lisa Radcliffe?" My stomach dropped, like actually dropped. That horrible sinking feeling you get on a roller coaster, except worse, because this was real. I hadn't told anyone my name. The ticket was under a fake name. Julia Thompson. I'd paid cash, kept my head down, didn't talk to anyone. How did he know? I shook my head, trying to keep my face neutral. "No, sorry, wrong person." He sighed, like he'd heard that before, like it was all part of the script. He pulled a clipboard from under his arm, one of those official-looking ones with a metal clip at the top, and flipped through a couple of pages. They were covered in tiny print. Forms, documents. It looked legitimate. "Look," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "I get it. You're scared. But your parents signed the order. I'm here to transport you to Circle of Hope. It's a therapeutic wilderness program in North Carolina. They're expecting you tonight." I stared at him. My mouth went completely dry. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. "I don't know what you're talking about." He tilted his head like a dog hearing a strange noise, sizing me up. "Lisa, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. I've been doing this for 8 years. I've transported over 300 kids. I've seen every trick in the book. Running doesn't help. Making a scene doesn't help. You're a minor. The court order is legal. Now you can walk out with me voluntarily and we'll get you some food on the way, or I can restrain you. According to protocol, your choice." My mind was racing. Circle of Hope. I'd heard of those places. Troubled teen boot camps, wilderness therapy programs. They were legal, barely. Parents who couldn't handle their kids anymore, or didn't want to, could sign them away to these companies. And they'd come in the middle of the night, drag them out of bed in front of their siblings, and ship them off to some compound in the woods where they'd hike until they broke down and healed. I'd read horror stories online. Kids dying from dehydration, abuse, torture disguised as therapy. But here's the thing. My parents were dead. Car accident when I was 9. Black ice on Route 421. They died instantly, the cops said, like that was supposed to be comforting. I'd been in foster care ever since. 5 placements in 8 years. No one had the authority to sign me into anything. No legal guardian, just a caseworker named Emma who forgot my birthday every year and only called when she needed to move me again. He was lying. I stood up fast, grabbing my duffel bag, holding it against my chest like a shield. "You have the wrong person. My name's not Lisa." He didn't move, just clicked his pen, one of those fancy metal ones, and made a note on his clipboard. Calm, unbothered. "I figured you'd say that." He pulled a laminated ID card from his vest pocket and held it up at eye level. "Guardian Youth Transport Services. Agent Matt Phelps. Authorized juvenile custodial transport. License TN 4782. It looked real. The kind of real that makes you second-guess yourself. Official font, holographic seal, photo ID, everything. I started backing toward the counter, nearly tripping over one of the bolted-down chairs. "I'm not going anywhere with you." The clerk looked up. Finally, like he just realized something was happening in his station. "Hey," I said, my voice cracking, way too high. "This guy is trying to take me. I don't know him. He's lying." Matt, or whatever his actual name was, didn't even flinch. He walked over to the counter, calm as anything, like he was just asking about bus schedules, and slid a folded piece of paper across to the clerk. "Legal transport order," he said, tapping it with one finger. "Signed by her legal guardians. She's a documented runaway. I'm authorized to return her to the therapeutic program. Everything's in order." The clerk unfolded the paper slowly, like he didn't really want to be involved. I was trying to see what was on it, but I couldn't get a good angle. It looked official. More forms, more tiny print. The clerk nodded. Just nodded. Didn't even read the whole thing. "Look, kid," the clerk said to me, not meeting my eyes. "I can't get involved in family stuff. If he's got the paperwork—" "He doesn't?" I shouted loud, enough that the old lady by the vending machines woke up and looked over. "My parents are dead. I don't have legal guardians. He's lying." The clerk looked uncomfortable now, shifting his weight, glancing between me and Matt like he wanted someone to make this easier for him. "She's been in 4 placements this year," Matt said, his voice smooth, concerned, like a guidance counselor. "She's got a documented history of lying to authorities and manipulating adults. It's all in the case file. I'm not the bad guy here. I'm trying to help her." I felt like I was going to throw up. He was good. Really, really good. And the clerk didn't care. He just wanted me gone. Wanted this whole situation gone. "Don't cause a scene," the clerk muttered, already turning back to his phone. "Just go with the officer." "He's not an officer." My voice was shaking now. I could feel tears starting, which made me furious because I didn't want to cry in front of this man. But Matt was already moving. He grabbed my arm just above the elbow. Not rough, not violent, but firm, professional. The kind of grip that says, "I've done this 100 times, and you're not getting away." It didn't hurt, but I knew if I pulled, it would. "Let go of me." I tried to twist out of his grip, but he just adjusted, moved his hand, maintained control. The old lady with the shopping bag looked over, her face all concern for a second, then looked away. She didn't want to get involved. The guy in the Carhartt jacket didn't even wake up. The clerk was already back on his phone. Matt leaned in close, and when he spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. But there was something hard in it, something that made my blood go cold. "You can scream all you want. No one's going to help you. They think you're a spoiled brat throwing a tantrum. They think I'm doing my job, taking you back to your parents. Now walk, or I will carry you. Your choice." He started pulling me toward the door, the front door, out into the blizzard, toward wherever he'd parked that van. And that's when it really hit me like a bucket of ice water. This wasn't random. He hadn't just happened to be here. He'd been watching, waiting, maybe for hours. He knew I was alone. He knew I was a runaway, and he was using the system, the exact same system that's supposed to protect kids like me, to take me. He was good because he'd done this before. I couldn't let him get me outside. Once I was in that van, I was gone. Just gone. Another kid who ran away and never came home. No one would look for me. Emma would file a report, sure, but she wouldn't actually look. She'd just close my case. I went limp, dropped all my weight, dead weight. My knees hit the floor. He cursed under his breath and adjusted his grip, trying to haul me up. "Asthma," I gasped, clutching my chest. "I can't breathe. I need my inhaler. It's in the bathroom, in my bag. Please." He stopped. I could feel him calculating, weighing his options. He glanced at the clerk, who was deliberately not looking, then back at me. 2 minutes, he said finally. "I'm standing right outside the door. You try anything and I restrain you. Understood? I nodded, gasping, trying to sell it. He dragged me to my feet and walked me to the women's restroom on the far side of the lobby. He let go of my arm and pointed at the door. 2 minutes, Lisa. I stumbled inside and he stationed himself right outside, arms crossed, feet planted. I could see his shadow under the door. I locked it and looked around, my brain going 100 miles an hour. 2 stalls. A sink with a soap dispenser that was empty. A paper towel holder. A mirror with a crack running through it. And above the second stall, a ceiling tile that looked slightly crooked. I climbed onto the toilet, my hands shaking so bad I almost slipped. I pushed the tile up and it lifted easily. The crawl space above was dark and full of dust and exposed wiring, but I didn't care. I grabbed the edges and pulled myself up, my arms burning, my bag catching on the frame. I crawled forward over the drop ceiling tiles, trying not to put my weight on any one spot, terrified I was going to crash through. It was freezing up here, and I could barely see. I crawled toward what I hoped was the utility closet or maybe the manager's office, anywhere that wasn't directly above the bathroom. Below me, I heard his voice. Lisa, time's up. A pause. I held my breath. Lisa. The door rattled. He was trying the handle, then a harder bang, a kick. The lock broke, and the door slammed open. I pressed myself flat against a ceiling beam, not moving, barely breathing. There was a gap between 2 tiles where the light came through, and I could see down into the bathroom. He checked both stalls, looked under them, behind the door, everywhere. Then he stood in the middle of the bathroom, hands on his hips, and pulled out his phone. He dialed. It rang once. Yeah, it's me, he said. His voice sounded different now. Less professional, more casual. Target secured. Well, no, not a contract. No paperwork on this one. She's a freebie, foster kid, Jane Doe. No one's looking for her. Trust me. A pause. He listened. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. How much for a redhead? I stopped breathing. He wasn't taking me to a camp. He was selling me. He stood there for another minute, talking numbers, logistics, delivery times like I was furniture. Then he hung up, swore under his breath, and walked out, slamming the door so hard the mirror cracked more. I stayed in that ceiling for 4 hours. I heard him out in the lobby, pacing, making more calls. At one point, I heard him talking to the clerk, asking if there was a back exit if anyone had left. I heard the clerk say no, he hadn't seen anything, and Matt should probably just check the parking lot. Finally, around midnight, I heard his footsteps leave. The front door chimed. That little electronic ding. I waited another 30 minutes, counting in my head, making sure he was really gone. Then I crawled back, lowered myself down into the bathroom, my legs shaking so bad I could barely stand. I unlocked the door and peeked into the lobby, empty. Just the clerk, slumped over the counter, half asleep. I walked past him without a word, my heart pounding in my throat, and looked out the front window. His van was still there, parked under a streetlight. White, commercial, logo on the side in blue letters, Guardian Youth Transport, protecting families, rebuilding futures. I memorized the plate. Kentucky tags, XBR 4829. Then I walked out the back exit into the snow and didn't stop walking until I hit the main road. I was freezing. My jacket wasn't made for this. But I kept walking, and eventually a semi-truck pulled over. The driver was an older guy, maybe 60, with a kind face. "You okay, kid?" I lied and said my mom kicked me out and I just needed to get to Lexington. He didn't ask questions, just turned up the heat, and handed me a blanket. By morning, I was in Ohio. I never reported it. Who would believe me? A runaway with no ID, no proof, accusing a guy with a badge and official paperwork. It would have been my word against his, and I'd already seen how that played out at the bus station. No one cared, no one helped. So I kept running. I changed my name, got a job under the table, stayed off the grid, but 3 years later I saw it on the news. A trafficking ring busted in eastern Kentucky. Fake youth transport agents. They'd been abducting runaways from bus stations, truck stops, anywhere kids pass through alone, and selling them. 12 sets of handcuffs found in a van. 3 girls recovered alive. 2 still missing. The operation had been running for at least 6 years. The ringleader? Still at large. They showed his picture on the screen. It was him, Matt Phelps, if that was even his real name. Probably wasn't. And here's the thing that keeps me up at night. He saw my face. He knows my real name. He had my information, which means he probably has more. And guys like that, they don't just stop. They don't just disappear. So yeah, running away is hard. Staying hidden is harder. But getting caught by someone who's figured out how to do it in broad daylight with witnesses, with fake badges and legal paperwork, and make everyone think he's the good guy. That's the kind of thing that makes you check every car that slows down near you. That makes you jump when someone says your name in a crowded place. That makes you keep your doors locked and your lights on, and never ever trust someone just because they look official. Because I know he's still out there. I know he's still doing it. And I know somewhere in whatever passes for his brain, he remembers the one that got away. The redhead who crawled into the ceiling and disappeared. And someday maybe he'll come looking. That's why I don't stay anywhere long. That's why I'm telling you this story. Because if you're out there, if you're young and alone and thinking about running, you need to know. The monsters aren't always in the dark. Sometimes they're wearing badges. Sometimes they're driving white vans with logos on the side. Sometimes they're standing in a bus station with a clipboard, and everyone around you thinks they're the hero. And no one, absolutely no one, is going to save you but yourself. I remember the exact moment I realized I was holding someone's murder in my hands. It was January 4th, 2024, around 9 p.m., and I was alone in the basement archives of the Watauga County Historical Museum. The skull I was cataloging felt wrong. Not spiritually wrong or supernaturally wrong. Just factually, scientifically wrong. Let me back up a bit. My name is Dr. Hugo Hopkins, and I'm the curator of historical artifacts and osteology at a small county museum tucked into the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. It's not a glamorous job. Most days I'm fielding calls from people who think their grandfather's Civil War uniform is worth millions, or cataloging donated church hymnals from 1952. But it pays the bills, and honestly, I like the quiet. I like being surrounded by history, even if that history is sometimes just old farming equipment and faded photographs. December 18th, 2023, I got a call from the Reed family. They're what you'd call local royalty in our corner of Appalachia. The Reeds have been here since before the Revolution, own half the timber rights in 3 counties, and their name is on the hospital wing, the high school auditorium, and about 6 historical plaques downtown. Mrs. Adelaide Reed, the matriarch, was on the phone. Her voice had that particular quality of someone who's used to being listened to. She explained that their family crypt, built into a hillside on their property back in the 1850s, was eroding. Heavy rains over the past few years had destabilized the ground, and the family had made the difficult decision to exhume their ancestors and relocate them. But rather than simply reburying them elsewhere, Mrs. Reed wanted to donate the skeletal remains to the museum for historical preservation and study. She made it sound noble, like she was doing the community a service. I'll be honest, I was excited. Legitimate historical human remains don't cross my desk often, and the Reed family history was intertwined with the region's development, and this could be a genuine research opportunity. We set up a meeting for December 20th when the Reeds arrived. It wasn't just Mrs. Adelaide. She brought her son Boone Reed, who ran the family's timber business, and her nephew Dominic MacLeod, who apparently handled the family's legal affairs. They pulled up in a massive black SUV, towing a trailer covered with a tarp. Underneath that tarp were 12 wooden boxes, each labeled with a name and date. Adelaide walked me through the collection. Great-great-grandfather Alan Reed, 1847, Aunt Ruthie Reed, 1889, Uncle Emmett MacLeod, 1923. She had this reverent tone, like she was introducing me to living relatives at a reunion. I remember Boone standing there with his arms crossed, not saying much. He was a big guy, probably in his late 50s, with that weathered look you get from working outdoors. Dominic was younger, maybe 40, and had this nervous energy, kept checking his watch. Adelaide explained their one condition. Everything had to be properly cataloged and stored by January 6th. Old Christmas, she called it. It's an Appalachian tradition. Little Christmas. Epiphany, whatever you want to call it. She said it was important to the family that their ancestors be settled by then. Some old superstition about spirits being restless between Christmas and Old Christmas. I didn't think much of it. Families have their traditions, especially old families like the Reeds. We moved the boxes into the basement archives, which was climate-controlled and secure. I assured Adelaide I'd handle everything personally and with the utmost care. She smiled, shook my hand with both of hers, and said, "I knew we could count on you, Dr. Hopkins. You're a man who respects history." The work started on December 21st. I cleared my schedule as much as I could to focus on the collection. Each box contained skeletal remains wrapped in cloth, along with handwritten notes about the deceased. The first few boxes were exactly what I expected. The bones had that yellowish-brown staining you get from decades in soil. The skeletal structure showed age-appropriate degeneration. Everything checked out. Then I got to box number 7, Alan MacLeod, 1935. I opened it on January the 2nd, 2024, just after New Year's. I remember because I'd spent New Year's Eve at home alone, like usual, and came in the next morning with leftover pizza and a mild headache. I unwrapped the cloth carefully, laid out the bones on the examination table, and started my initial assessment. The first thing I noticed was the color. These bones were too white, too clean. Bones buried for almost 90 years should have significant soil staining, some surface erosion, maybe root damage. These looked like they'd been buried for maybe a decade tops. I thought maybe there was something about the soil composition in the Reed crypt that prevented staining. It happens sometimes. Then I examined the teeth. Third molar on the upper right had a porcelain fused to metal crown. My stomach dropped. That type of crown wasn't used until the 1980s at the earliest. I checked my notes. Alan MacLeod supposedly died in 1935 at age 42. I sat there for a long moment just staring at that crown. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the date was wrong. Maybe the bones had been mislabeled at some point. Families make mistakes, especially when dealing with multiple generations of dead relatives. I made a note to call Adelaide and ask about it, but I wanted to check the other boxes first. Box 8. Loretta Reed, 1958. The femur had a surgical pin. Not a modern titanium pin, but still, orthopedic pins like that weren't common until the 1960s. And this one looked even more recent, maybe 1990s, based on the design. Box 9. Emmett Reed Jr., 1973. The skull had a small circular defect in the right parietal bone. Could be a lot of things, but it looked like a bullet hole. More disturbing, it had been filled with some kind of putty and colored to blend in, like someone had tried to disguise it as a natural flaw. I stopped examining. My hands were shaking. I went upstairs, made a cup of coffee I didn't drink, and tried to think rationally. I'm a scientist. I deal in evidence, not speculation. But the evidence was pointing somewhere really, really dark. I went back down to the basement around 6 p.m. The museum had closed at 5, and I was alone in the building. I started pulling every box, checking every set of remains. Box 10, Ruth Ann McLeod, 1982. The spine showed evidence of scoliosis surgery with Harrington rods, a technique used from the 1960s through early 2000s, but these specific rods looked contemporary, maybe early 2000s. Box 11, Dale Reed, 1999. The ribs showed evidence of CPR, fractures, and a pattern consistent with chest compressions. But there was something else. The sternum had been cut, a clean vertical line. An autopsy. Someone had performed a post-mortem examination on this body. I was pacing, now my mind racing. This wasn't a historical collection. This was recent. These people hadn't died in the 1800s or even the mid-1900s. They died recently, maybe within the last 20 or 30 years, and someone had backdated them, created false provenance, and hidden them in the family crypt. The last box, number 12, was labeled Adelaide Ruth Reed, 1887. It should have been the oldest remains, the matriarch's namesake. I opened it with gloved hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Inside was a complete skeleton, and unlike the others, this one actually looked old. The bones had the right coloration, the right erosion patterns. The teeth showed period-appropriate dental work, or lack thereof. This one was real. This was an actual historical burial, which meant the Reeds had mixed real ancestors with fake ones, creating a buffer of legitimacy. I sat down hard on my stool. My brain was trying to piece it together, and I didn't like where it was going. Every generation, maybe every decade or so, someone in the Reed family died under suspicious circumstances and got added to the family crypt. The dates were spread out, enough not to raise suspicion, and now that the crypt was eroding, they needed a new hiding place. What better than a museum? Hide the evidence in plain sight. Give it a veneer of historical legitimacy. I pulled out my phone. It was 8:30 p.m. I should call the police, right? But what would I say? I have bones that don't match their supposed death dates? That's not proof of murder. It's not even proof of wrongdoing. It could still be innocent mistakes, mislabeling, family confusion over the years. I needed more. I carefully extracted a tooth from the 1935 skull and sealed it in an evidence bag. DNA testing could tell me who this person really was. I did the same with 3 other suspicious remains. If any of these matched missing persons cases, that would be real evidence. I was labeling the bags when I heard it. Footsteps upstairs. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. The museum was closed. The doors were locked. I was supposed to be alone. My whole body went cold. I stood, frozen, listening. The footsteps moved across the main floor, unhurried, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. They reached the basement door. The handle turned. I hadn't locked it from the inside. Why would I? I was supposed to be alone. The door opened and Boone Reed started down the stairs. He was wearing work boots, jeans, and a heavy canvas jacket. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Working late, Dr. Hopkins?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Mr. Reed, I didn't hear you come in. Museum's closed." "I know. I let myself in. Hope you don't mind. Mama wanted me to check on the progress. She's very particular about old Christmas, you know. Family tradition." He reached the bottom of the stairs and walked over to the examination table where I'd laid out Alan McLeod's remains. "How's it going?" "Fine, good. Almost done, actually." He picked up the skull, turned it over in his hands like he was examining a melon at the grocery store. "This is Uncle Alan. Had bad teeth, I'm told. Family genetics." He smiled again, and I noticed for the first time how cold his eyes were. He set the skull down and reached into his jacket. I tensed, thinking weapon, but he pulled out another box. Smaller than the others, maybe a foot square. He set it on the table. "We forgot one. This needs to be added to the collection." I stared at the box. I wasn't told about another. "It's from 2024. We like to keep the collection current." My mouth went dry. I looked at the box, then at Boone. There's nothing in it." "Not yet." He was still smiling. The basement suddenly felt very small, very quiet. The walls were concrete, the ceiling low. No windows. One exit, and Boone was standing between me and the stairs. "Mr. Reed, I think there's been some confusion." "Has there?" He stepped closer. "You're a smart man, Dr. Hopkins, educated. You notice things. That's why Mama liked you. She said you'd appreciate the family history." I backed up until I hit the examination table. "The police will..." "The police?" He laughed, a short, barking sound. "Sheriff Huff is my cousin. Deputy Reynolds married into the McLeod side." "You think they're going to help you?" He was right. This was a small county. The Reeds weren't just wealthy. They were connected, generationally entrenched. If I called 911, who would respond? Boone picked up the empty box again, studied it. "Every family has black sheep, Dr. Hopkins. People who don't fit, who cause problems, who threaten the family's reputation or fortune. We've been dealing with that problem for a long time. The crypt was a good solution. Private property, sacred family ground. No one questions a family crypt. But time moves on, things erode. We needed a new solution. And I'm a problem now." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You're too curious. Mama said you'd be respectful, but I told her academics always dig too deep. It's in your nature." He set the box down and started rolling up his sleeves. "Nothing personal. We actually respect your work." My mind was racing. I was in my 40s, not exactly athletic. Boone was bigger, stronger, and had the advantage of surprise and position. Fighting wasn't an option. Running wasn't an option. I needed to change the situation. The fire alarm. It was on the wall by the stairs, behind Boone, but there was also a smoke detector on the ceiling directly above me. And I had a lighter in my pocket because I sometimes burned sage when handling certain artifacts, some old habit from graduate school. "Can I ask something first?" I needed to buy time. Boone shrugged. "Sure." "Who were they really, the ones in the boxes?" He seemed to relax slightly, like I'd asked him to tell a story he was proud of. "Alan in 35 was actually my brother Kendrick. He died in 2012. Wanted to sell the timber rights to a development company. Loretta from 58 was my aunt. Actually did die in 1991, but not naturally. She knew too much about Daddy's business dealings. Emmett from 73 was a cousin who got into drugs, became unreliable. Ruth Ann was a problem wife. Dale was a blackmailer. He listed them like grocery items. And the real ancestors? Scattered in. Enough real ones to make it believable. You salt the lie with truth, makes it easier to swallow. I slid my hand into my pocket, found the lighter. Why tell me this? Because you asked, and because it doesn't matter. He started moving toward me. I flicked the lighter and held it up to the smoke detector. Don't come closer. He stopped, looking confused. What are you? The flame caught the edge of my notepad I'd grabbed from the table and held up. The paper lit quickly, smoke billowing up. The detector started chirping, then blaring. The sprinkler system activated 3 seconds later. Water poured from the ceiling, drenching everything. Boone shouted in anger and confusion, and I ran. Not for the stairs, he was blocking those, but for the emergency exit at the back of the basement. It was supposed to be alarmed, but I didn't care. I slammed through it, the alarm adding to the chaos, and I was outside in the cold January night. I ran to my car, fumbling with keys, hands soaking wet and shaking. Boone burst out of the basement exit behind me, but I was already in my car, engine starting. I reversed hard, nearly hit a tree, and tore out of the parking lot. I drove straight to Boone County, the next county over, and walked into their sheriff's station at 10:15 p.m., dripping wet and probably looking insane. I told them everything. They were skeptical at first, but I had the teeth in my pocket. Still in their evidence bags, I showed them photos I'd taken of the suspicious remains. I gave them names, dates, everything. It took 6 hours of interviews and 2 days of investigation before they contacted the state police. The Reed connection ran deep, but it didn't run into neighboring counties. By January's 6th, Old Christmas, the state police had exhumed the remains. By January 10th, they'd matched 3 of the teeth to missing persons cases. Kendrick Reed reported missing in 2012. Ruth Ann Blanchard disappeared in 2002, and a man named Travis Yancey, gone since 1999. Adelaide Reed died of a heart attack on January 12th, the day before her arrest warrant was issued. Boone Reed and Dominic McLeod were arrested on January 15th. They're still awaiting trial as of now. The charges include multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. The museum fired me on January 8th. They said I'd destroyed valuable historical artifacts and cost them a major donor relationship. The water damage from the sprinklers ruined months of other work too. I don't blame them, honestly. But I'm not sorry. The box Boone brought, the empty one for 2024, they found that in his truck. My DNA was on the rim where I'd touched it. The prosecutor said it shows premeditation. I don't work in museums anymore. I'm not sure I want to. I got a job teaching at a community college, 2 counties over, basic anthropology courses. It's quiet. The bones I handle now are replicas, teaching models, nothing that used to be a person. But I still think about it sometimes, especially as Old Christmas approaches each year. How many other families are out there with crypts and secrets? How many collections and how many small museums are hiding something darker than dust and time? And I think about Adelaide Reed's last words to me on December 20th when they delivered the boxes. She shook my hand and said, "You're a man who respects history." What she meant was, "You're a man who won't ask questions." She was wrong about that. But I understand now why she thought a museum was the perfect hiding place. Because people trust history. We build temples to it, hire priests to protect it, and we never think to question whether the story we're told is true. The Reeds understood that. They'd been writing their own history for generations, literally burying the truth and replacing it with something prettier, something acceptable. And it almost worked. I still have nightmares about that empty box, about Boone's smile, about how close I came to becoming history myself. But mostly I have nightmares about all the boxes I didn't question, all the remains I accepted at face value, every time I trusted the provenance without digging deeper. Because here's the thing about history. It's not written by the victors. It's written by whoever's left standing. And sometimes the only reason they're still standing is because they've gotten very, very good at making other people disappear. January 5th is the busiest day of the year in a county morgue. Not because more people die, but because the living finally get around to finding them. I learned that the hard way during my contract assignment in Kettle Creek, West Virginia, back in January 2019. My name's Gabe, and I'm a forensic pathologist. Or I was, I guess, depending on how you want to look at it now. I work locum assignments, which means I'm basically a temp doctor who fills in when small-town morgues get overwhelmed. The pay's decent, the work is straightforward, and usually I can keep my head down and get through a shift without any drama. Usually. Kettle Creek is one of those Appalachian towns where everyone knows everyone, and the hospital serves about 6 surrounding counties. The county morgue is in the basement of Mercy General, and during the holidays, it turns into what the locals call the holiday spike. People die alone in trailers, cabins, hunting shacks. Sometimes they're not found until after New Year's when a relative finally decides to check in. Add the opioid crisis to that, and you've got yourself a cooler that's packed wall to wall. I'd driven up from Charleston on the 3rd. The contract agency I work for called me on New Year's Day. They said Kettle Creek's regular pathologist, an older guy named Dr. Ferguson, had slipped on ice and broken his hip. They needed someone to cover through the 7th. 5 days. Easy money. I'd worked worse. The drive took about 3 hours through winding mountain roads. It was snowing when I arrived. That thick, heavy snow that makes everything look clean, even when it isn't. I checked into a motel just off the main highway. One of those places with thin walls and a vending machine that only takes exact change. The room smelled like cigarettes and pine sol, but the bed was decent enough, and honestly, I wasn't planning on spending much time there anyway. When I arrived for my shift that morning, the place looked like a disaster zone. The main cooler was full. Bodies were stacked on gurneys in the hallway because there was literally no room left. The smell of industrial disinfectant was so strong it burned my nostrils, but it wasn't quite strong enough to cover the other smell. You know the one I mean. It's not something you forget no matter how many years you're in this line of work. The day shift assistant, a guy named Elijah, was already stressed when I walked in. He was maybe mid-40s, balding, with the kind of permanent slouch that comes from years of lifting dead weight. He handed me a clipboard and said, "We've got 11 unprocessed. Sheriff's been calling every hour about number 4. Wants him released to the crematorium by 5. I looked at the board. John Doe, number 4. Found in a snowbank off Route 19. Tagged as overdose. Suspected fentanyl. No next of kin identified. Indigent burial. County-funded cremation." It all seemed standard until I asked Elijah why the rush. He shrugged, not even looking up from his computer. County only pays for cremation if it's done before the budget week resets. Tomorrow's Little Christmas, State offices are closed until the 7th. Funeral home closes early today at 5. If we don't release him by then, the county's stuck with storage fees. I nodded, but something about it felt off. I mean, it's not like the guy was going anywhere. But I'd learned not to question the bureaucracy of small-town death logistics. Every county has its quirks, its shortcuts, its ways of making the numbers work. I grabbed the file and went to pull the body. John Doe number 4 was in drawer 17. I remember that specifically because 17's always been an unlucky number for me. Stupid superstition, I know. But when you work with the dead, you start to notice patterns that probably don't mean anything but feel like they do. When I rolled him out, the first thing I noticed was the "Do Not Autopsy" sticker on the body bag. Bright red, impossible to miss. That's not standard procedure. Usually, an unidentified overdose gets at least a preliminary exam. It's protocol. You check for track marks, needle punctures, signs of chronic drug use. You take blood samples, run a tox screen. You document everything because even if the guy's a John Doe, he's still someone's son, someone's brother, someone's father maybe. I peeled the sticker off, and underneath it, written in black Sharpie directly on the bag itself, were the words, "Cleared by Sheriff Mackenzie, accidental." That made me pause. Sheriffs don't clear causes of death. Medical examiners do. That's literally my job. I stood there for a second, staring at those words, and I felt this prickle at the back of my neck. You ever get that feeling when something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is? That was it. I unzipped the bag. The guy looked to be in his 50s, maybe early 60s. Thin, graying hair, pale skin with that grayish tint that comes a few hours post-mortem. He was wearing a hospital gown, which was odd in itself. Most people found outside are wearing street clothes. But what really caught my attention was the thick wool scarf wrapped around his neck. It was dark blue, hand-knit maybe, wound tight around his throat, like someone had been trying to keep him warm. If he'd been found in a snowbank, why hadn't the police removed the scarf during their initial examination? Standard procedure is to document and photograph all clothing, then remove it to check for injuries. The scarf should have been bagged as evidence, or at the very least removed to check for signs of trauma to the neck. I made a note of it on my pad. Then I started my external examination. That's where you check the body for any obvious signs of injury, disease, or anything that might indicate cause of death. I started with his hands. No defensive wounds. Nails were clean, a little ragged but not torn. No bruising on the knuckles. Then I checked the lividity. That's the pooling of blood in the body after death, and it tells you the position someone was in when they died. Lividity doesn't lie. It's gravity and blood and time, and it's one of the most reliable indicators we have. His lividity was on the front. Chest, face, arms. Dark purple. Fully settled. But according to the police report clipped to his file, he was found on his back in the snow, next to a guardrail on Route 19. That doesn't add up. If he died on his back, the blood pools on the back. Buttocks, shoulder blades, the back of the head. If the lividity's on the front, it means he died face down, which means someone moved him, hours after he was already dead. Lividity takes 4 to 6 hours to fully set. You can't fake it. You can't change it. I grabbed my thermometer and took a core temp reading. The body was too warm. Way too warm for someone who'd been lying in 10-degree weather for any length of time. His internal temperature suggested he'd been indoors until very recently. Maybe within the last 6 hours. Definitely not the 12 to 18 hours The police report claimed he'd been lying in that snowbank. My heart was starting to beat faster now. Something was very, very wrong here. I started to unwrap the scarf. It was wound tight, almost aggressively, so, like whoever put it on him didn't want it coming off. As I peeled away the layers, I saw it. His neck was purple. Not the pale purple of early decomposition, dark purple. Bruised. Deep tissue bruising that extended from just below his jaw all the way down to his collarbone. I pressed gently on the tissue, feeling for fractures. And there it was, the hyoid bone. A small U-shaped bone in the neck that sits just above the larynx. It was crushed, completely fractured. You don't crush a hyoid bone from an overdose. You don't crush it from falling. You crush it from strangulation, from sustained, deliberate pressure applied by hands or a ligature. It's one of the most definitive signs of homicide. My hands were shaking now. I set down my clipboard and took a breath, trying to steady myself. I've seen a lot of bodies in my career. Overdoses, suicides, accidents, natural deaths. But this was different. This was murder. And someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make it look like something else. I checked his pockets, even though the police report said they were empty. The report was wrong. Inside the front pocket of his hospital gown was a crumpled hospital wristband. I smoothed it out under the light. The wristband was from this hospital. Mercy General. Patient name. Unknown male. Admitted January 4th at 9:30 p.m. Discharged January 5th at 1:15 p.m. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 4:45. This man had been discharged alive less than 4 hours ago, and now he was on my table tagged as an overdose, found in a snowbank. I walked over to Elijah's desk, still holding the wristband. I asked him if we had any record of this guy being admitted here recently, if there was any way to pull up his medical records, even if he was admitted as an unknown. Elijah didn't even look up from his computer. He just shook his head. "Doc, we don't track Jane and John Does like that. If the sheriff says it's an OD, it's an OD. Just sign off so we can move him. Funeral home's going to be here in 15 minutes. I didn't sign off. Instead, I went back to the body, locked the wheels on the gurney, and started setting up for a full internal examination. I laid out my instruments, scalpels, rib cutters, forceps. I wasn't supposed to do this. The county hadn't authorized it. But something about this whole thing stank, and I wasn't about to let someone get cremated when the evidence was screaming murder. That's when the door to the suite opened. A man walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit, which funeral directors usually do. He was wearing cargo pants, a black windbreaker, and tactical boots. The kind with reinforced toes. He had a shaved head, maybe late 30s, and when he smiled at me, it didn't reach his eyes. He said, "Hey Doc, I'm here for number 4. Let's get him loaded up." I looked at him, then at the clock. "You're early. I haven't finished processing him yet." He walked closer, hands in his pockets, casual. Too casual. "Sheriff said he was cleared. Just need you to sign the release form and I'll get him out of your hair. I know you got a lot of bodies to process today." I shook my head. "I'm in the middle of an autopsy. He's not going anywhere until I'm done." The casual demeanor dropped. His jaw tightened. "Doc, you're making this harder than it needs to be. It's a holiday. Let the man rest." There was something in his voice. Not a threat exactly, but a warning. Like he was giving me an out. Like he was saying, you can still walk away from this. But I couldn't. I've never been good at walking away. I grabbed a scalpel from my tray, not to threaten him, but to make a point. I positioned the blade at the top of the sternum and made the first cut of the Y incision, straight down the center of the chest. The skin parted easily and blood welled up from underneath. Dark, thick blood. Internal hemorrhaging. Consistent with strangulation, consistent with crush injuries to the neck. I made the lateral cuts, one across each shoulder, completing the Y. Then I looked up at him. Now it's an open autopsy. You can't cremate an open case. That's federal law. If you try to take this body now, you're destroying evidence in a homicide investigation. For a second, just a second, I thought he was going to lunge at me. His hand moved to his belt, and I saw the outline of something under his jacket. A gun, maybe, or a knife. But then he stopped. His hand dropped. He stared at me for a long, long moment, and then he turned and walked out. He didn't say a word, just left. The door slammed behind him, and the sound echoed through the empty morgue. I called the state police. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial the number. It took them 3 hours to get there. 3 hours during which I sat in that morgue, door locked, with a dead man on my table and a scalpel in my hand, wondering if that guy was going to come back. When the state police finally arrived, they took the body, my notes, and my preliminary findings. They told me they'd be in touch. They told me I'd done the right thing. They told me not to discuss the case with anyone. I didn't hear from them again. A week later, I was back home in Charleston. I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I checked the case file online. The state medical examiner's office keeps digital records, and as a licensed pathologist, I have access. The cause of death had been officially listed as hypothermia, not strangulation, not homicide, hypothermia. My autopsy notes were gone, deleted from the system. And at the bottom of the file, there was a note. Case closed. No further investigation warranted. My contract with Kettle Creek was terminated early for failure to follow county protocol. They didn't pay me for the last 2 days. I tried calling the state police. The detective I'd spoken to didn't return my calls. I tried reaching out to the hospital's chief administrator. No response. I even tried calling the county coroner's office. The woman who answered told me Dr. Ferguson had retired and they weren't taking on any new locum contracts. 3 weeks later, I was scrolling through the hospital's website. I don't know why. Morbid curiosity, maybe. Or maybe I was looking for a proof that I wasn't crazy, that what I'd seen was real. And I found it. There was a memorial page for organ and tissue donors. A list of people who had donated their bodies or organs to help others. It's supposed to be a nice thing, you know, a tribute. And there, listed among them, was a John Doe, donated January 5th, 2019. Tissues harvested and distributed to regional medical centers. They sold his tissues before they cremated him. Before anyone could ask questions. Before anyone could prove what really happened. Corneas, skin, bone, heart valves, they're all worth money, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands sometimes. And a John Doe, someone with no family, no one to ask questions, that's easy money. I don't work in West Virginia anymore. Hell, I barely work in morgues anymore. I do consultant work now, mostly from home. I review autopsy reports, testify in court cases, that sort of thing. I don't go into the field if I can help it. But every January, when Little Christmas rolls around, I think about that man. I think about the scarf wrapped around his neck. I think about the hospital wristband in his pocket. I think about the bruises, the crushed hyoid bone, the evidence that someone erased. And I think about how easy it is to make someone disappear when no one's watching, when the state offices are closed, when the county's trying to save a few $100 on storage fees, when everyone's too busy celebrating to notice that the line between patient and body isn't always as clear as it should be. I don't know his real name. I don't know if he had family. I don't know what he did to end up on that gurney or why someone wanted him dead. But I know he didn't die of an overdose. I know he didn't die of hypothermia. And I know someone wanted him gone before anyone could prove otherwise. If you're ever in an Appalachian hospital during the holidays and you hear someone talking about clearing the backlog or freeing up beds for the new year, just remember, sometimes the people who are supposed to save you are the same ones who decide when you've outlived your usefulness. John Doe. Number 4, never got justice. His case is closed. His body is ash. And somewhere out there, someone got away with murder. But at least one person knows the truth. And now, so do you. In radio, dead air is the worst thing that can happen. 3 seconds of silence and you're scrambling, apologizing to listeners, checking cables, hoping the transmitter didn't blow. But I learned something that night in January of 1999. Dead air isn't the worst thing. Not even close. The worst thing is when something else fills that silence, something you didn't put there. My name is Henry Clooney, and I was the overnight DJ at WXCY, a tiny AM station broadcasting out of a double-wide trailer at the base of Copper Ridge in eastern Kentucky. We called ourselves the Voice of the Valley, but honestly, most nights I was lucky if 50 people were listening. Truckers, insomniacs, old folks who couldn't sleep. Our signal was weak, maybe 5,000 watts on a good day, and the station itself was nothing special. Just me, a mixing board from 1983, and a tower that rattled every time the wind picked up. January 5th, 1999. Old Christmas Eve. Most people don't know about Old Christmas, but in Appalachia, especially in the old hollows, folks still observe it. It's the traditional date for the Epiphany, the day the wise men reached Bethlehem. Some families out here celebrate it bigger than December 25th. They light candles in their windows, sing hymns, leave food out for travelers. It's quiet, respectful, a little eerie if I'm being honest. That night, a blizzard had rolled in hard around 9 p.m. By the time I got to the station for my midnight to 6 shift, there were already 8 inches on the ground, and the roads were a mess. My program director, a guy named Ron Jemison, called me from his house in town to say he couldn't make it out to swap the tapes. That meant I was on my own. No engineer, no backup, just me and a stack of pre-recorded gospel music and a space heater that barely worked. I didn't mind, honestly. I liked the solitude. I made myself a thermos of coffee, locked the trailer door, and settled into the chair. The plan was simple. Play the tapes, do a few station IDs, maybe read some local news if the wire service was still running. Easy shift. The trailer had 2 windows, one facing the parking lot and one facing the hill where the tower stood. Red lights blinked at the top of that tower, a rhythm I'd gotten used to over the 2 years I'd been working there. Blink, blink, blink. All night. Every night. It was almost comforting. Like a heartbeat. I remember looking out at those lights around 12:30 a.m., watching the snow swirl around them. And the wind was howling something fierce, and I could feel the trailer shifting slightly on its foundation. That happened sometimes during storms. I'd gotten used to that too. Around 1 a.m., I queued up a hymn called In the Garden. Beautiful song. Slow and reverent. Perfect for old Christmas. I hit play, leaned back, and watched the VU meters bounce. The warmth from the space heater was making me drowsy, and I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt. Just me, the music and the storm outside. That's when I noticed the phone line was dead. I picked up the receiver out of habit just to check. No dial tone. The blizzard must have knocked it out. No big deal. Nobody calls a radio station at 1 a.m. anyway. I set the receiver back down and took a sip of coffee. It was already going lukewarm. But then the song started to warp. At first, I thought it was the tape. Sometimes they stretch or get chewed up in the deck. But this wasn't that. The music slowed down, like someone was dragging their finger on a turntable. The words got deeper, distorted. The singer's voice dropped an octave, then two. It sounded wrong, unnatural. Then it just stopped. The meters dropped to 0, dead air. I lunged forward and hit the next cart. A backup track. Nothing. No sound. The meters weren't moving. I checked the board. All the faders were down, but I hadn't touched them. I looked at the master output. The needle was pinned. Something was coming through, but it wasn't from my board. That's when I heard the voice. It came through the studio monitors, clear as day. A man's voice. Calm. Almost friendly. That's a pretty song, Henry, but it's too sad for a celebration. Play something with a beat. I froze. My hands were still on the board, but I couldn't move them. My first thought was that someone had called in, but the phone was dead. My second thought was that Ron had patched something in remotely, but that didn't make sense either. Then I looked at the monitor light. It was green. Someone was broadcasting, and it wasn't me. I stood up, my chair rolling backward and hitting the wall. I said, "Who is this? How are you on this frequency?" The voice chuckled. Low, amused. You know how AM works, don't you, Henry? It's all about power. You pump out 5,000 watts, but I've got 20. You're just a whisper. I'm a scream. My hands were shaking. I grabbed the mic and keyed it. This is a restricted frequency. You're breaking FCC regulations. I'm calling the police. The voice laughed. With what phone, buddy? And besides, I don't think you want the police showing up just yet. See, I've got a request for you. It's for a listener. Her name's Lainey Dickinson. You know Lainey? I felt my stomach drop. Lainey Dickinson was a waitress at the Little Wren Diner in town. She'd gone missing 3 days ago. It was all over the local news. Her car was found in the diner parking lot, keys still in the ignition, purse on the seat. The police had search parties out, but the blizzard had shut everything down. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It came out as a whisper. Sure you do, the voice said. Lainey's been listening to your show for years. Real loyal. She used to call in and request songs. Sweet girl. A little too trusting, though. That's her problem. She got in my car thinking I was giving her a ride home. It was cold that night. Not as cold as tonight, but cold enough. She didn't want to walk. I felt like I was going to be sick. I said, "Where is she? What did you do?" "Oh, she's right here," the voice said. "Well, parts of her anyway. She's not in great shape, Henry. She fought pretty hard at first. Broke a nail on the door handle. It's still stuck there, actually. Pink polish. Real pretty. She always kept her nails nice. Professional, you know. Tips probably depended on it. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. This was some sick prank. It had to be, but then the voice continued, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. He wasn't just talking to me, he was broadcasting to the entire valley. Every radio tuned to WXEY was hearing this. Every trucker on Route 23. Every insomniac in their living room. Every old farmer who couldn't sleep. They were all hearing him describe what he'd done to Lainey Dickinson. I tried to cut the power to the board. I yanked cables out of the back. I hit the emergency shutoff switch. Nothing worked. The voice kept going. You ever notice how quiet it gets when someone stops screaming? The voice said. It's like the world takes a breath. Everything just stops. That's what happened with Lainey. She screamed for maybe 20 minutes. Then she went quiet. Real quiet. I almost missed the noise, you know? The silence felt wrong after that. I was hyperventilating now. I looked out the window toward the tower. The red lights were still blinking. Blink, blink, blink. He wasn't in the trailer. He was somewhere else. Then it hit me. He was at the tower. The transmitter shed was about 100 yards up the hill. It was a small cinder block building that housed the main equipment. If someone had tapped into the transmitter directly, they could override everything I was doing from the studio. And that's exactly what he'd done. I grabbed my coat and ran outside. The snow was coming down sideways, and the cold hit me like a punch to the chest. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The wind was screaming, and my boots sank into the drifts with every step. I had a flashlight in my pocket, and I clicked it on, sweeping it toward the hill. That's when I saw the footprints. They led from the woods, across the clearing, and straight to the transmitter shed. Fresh prints, big boots, deep impressions. Whoever made them was heavy, strong. I followed them, my breath coming out in clouds, my hands numb even inside my gloves. The whole time I could still hear the voice in my head like it was echoing from the tower itself. Lainey screamed for a long time, it said. But eventually she stopped. They always do. It's the cold, I think. Or maybe it's just the realization that nobody's coming, that nobody can hear you, that you're alone. I wanted to turn back. Every instinct in my body was telling me to get in my car and drive away. But I kept thinking about Lainey, about the people listening. If I didn't stop this, he'd keep talking. He'd keep broadcasting. And somewhere out there, Lainey's family was probably listening too. I reached the shed and saw that the door was cracked, open. Light spilled out from inside, a warm yellow glow that looked wrong against the darkness and the snow. My heart was hammering so hard, I thought it might break through my ribs. I pulled the door open and stepped inside. He was sitting on the floor. He was maybe 45, 50 years old. Thin face, patchy beard, wearing a heavy coat and a wool cap. He had a field radio in his lap, the kind military units use, and it was wired directly into the transmitter with alligator clips. He was holding a microphone in one hand. In the other hand, he was holding a ribbon, a yellow ribbon, the kind you tie in someone's hair. It was soaked in blood. He looked up at me and smiled. "You made it," he said. "I was hoping you would." It's no fun doing a show without an audience. You're the audience, Henry, you and everyone else out there listening. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around and get out of there. But I couldn't move. I just stood there staring at him, at the ribbon, at the way his eyes didn't blink. He keyed the mic again, and now, folks, a word from our sponsor. He reached into his coat. I saw the gun. I dove to the side as the shot went off. The sound was deafening in the small space. The bullet missed me and hit the main transformer on the wall. There was a flash of light, a crack like thunder, and then everything went dark. The transmitter died. The hum of electricity stopped. The tower lights blinked out. Silence. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran down the hill through the snow, slipping and falling and getting back up. My lungs were burning. My legs felt like they were going to give out. But I kept running. I made it to the trailer, locked the door, and called the police on the emergency CB radio we kept for backup. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the mic. They arrived 20 minutes later. State police, sheriff's department. By the time they got to the shed, he was gone. The field radio was still there, smashed to pieces. The transformer was fried, sparking and smoking, but he'd vanished into the woods. They found the ribbon, though. They sent it to the lab. It matched Laney's DNA. They searched the woods for 3 days. Brought in dogs, helicopters. They found nothing. No body, no tracks. Beyond the ones leading to the shed, it was like he'd just disappeared into the snow. They never found her body. They never found him either. The station shut down a month later. The equipment was too damaged, and the owner didn't want to rebuild. Insurance didn't cover acts of vandalism, and that's what they called it. Vandalism. Like it was some kids spray painting graffiti. I moved to Virginia, got a job at a college station, tried to forget. But I still think about that night, about Laney, about the voice. And sometimes late at night, I'll be flipping through the AM band on my car radio. Just static mostly, white noise. Fragments of distant stations bleeding through the atmosphere. But every now and then, I'll catch something. A voice. Faint. Buried under the hiss. It sounds like him. I'm still broadcasting, Henry. You just need to tune in. I turn the radio off when that happens. I tell myself it's interference. Crosstalk from a distant station. My brain playing tricks. But deep down, I know the truth. Once a signal goes out, it never really dies. It just keeps traveling. Through the air, through the dark, through the space between stations. Waiting for someone to hear it, and he's still out there. Still talking, still waiting, still broadcasting. I don't work in radio anymore. I haven't for 25 years. But I still hear him sometimes, in the static, in the silence, in the space between words. And I know, somewhere out there in the mountains of eastern Kentucky, there's a transmitter shed at the base of Copper Ridge. The tower's been torn down. The trailer's been hauled away. But the shed is still there. Empty, dark, except on old Christmas Eve. Because on that night, if you tune your radio to 1340 AM, you might hear something, not music, not talk, just a voice, calm, friendly, playing requests for people who never made it home. I've worked in insurance fraud for 11 years. Most cases are boring. A guy fakes a slip in a Walmart. A woman claims whiplash from a fender bender. You learn to spot the tells. But in January of 2019, I got assigned to a case in Grundy, Virginia, deep in coal country, that I still think about every single day. The file landed on my desk with a yellow sticky note from my supervisor. It just said, "Check the medical bills." The subject was a 12-year-old girl named Macy Sander. She had something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, according to the claims. Wheelchair-bound, feeding tube, the works. Her aunt, Lenore Sander, had been claiming state disability and pulling in donations from the community for years. The red flag. The medical visits were sporadic and never at the same clinic twice. No continuity of care. That's classic fraud behavior. My cover was simple. I told them I was doing a human interest piece for a regional magazine about Appalachian resilience during the holidays. Wanted to feature Macy and her story at the Old Christmas pageant. Old Christmas, if you don't know, is January 6th. It's when some folks in Appalachia still celebrate the birth of Christ, the way it was done before the calendar changed centuries ago. In Grundy, it was a big deal. The whole town turned out. I arrived 3 days before the pageant. Grundy is the kind of place where the hills press in on both sides of the main road and the fog never fully lifts. The church St. Jude's Methodist, sat on a hill just outside of town. It was old, probably from the 1800s, with white clapboard siding that had gone gray and a steeple that leaned slightly to the left. The parking lot was gravel and mud. Inside, the sanctuary was cold. I mean bone cold. There was a radiator along the back wall that hissed and clanked, but it didn't do much. I could see my breath. Lenore met me at the door. She was a big woman, maybe 50, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She shook my hand hard and said, "You must be the reporter." I told her I was. She said Macy was so excited to meet me. Macy was in the front pew, wrapped in blankets. She was small for 12, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. Her wheelchair was one of those old clunky ones, not a modern lightweight model. Lenore did all the talking. She told me about Macy's condition, how she couldn't walk, how her joints dislocated, how she needed round-the-clock care. Macy just sat there staring at her lap. When I asked Macy a question directly, Lenore would answer before the girl could even open her mouth. I asked if I could watch her rehearsal. Lenore hesitated, then said sure. The pageant was simple. The kids from town would dress up as shepherds and angels, and Macy would sing. Her voice, Lenore said, was a gift from God. The one thing the disease didn't take from her. That first rehearsal, I sat in the back with my notebook. The other kids ran around, loud and chaotic, but Macy stayed still in her wheelchair near the makeshift stage. Lenore hovered nearby, adjusting Macy's blanket, whispering instructions. Then Lenore stepped outside to smoke. I watched her through the window, pacing in the gravel lot, the cigarette glowing in the dusk. That's when Macy moved. She stood up. Not slowly, not carefully. She just stood, stretched her arms over her head and rolled her shoulders like she'd been sitting too long. I froze. She looked around, saw me staring, and our eyes locked. Her face went blank. Then she slumped back into the chair, pulling the blanket up to her chin, and went completely still. Lenore came back a minute later, and Macy was exactly as she'd been before. I didn't say anything, I just wrote it down. The pageant was set for the evening of January 6th. The day before, I went back to the church to interview Lenore for the article. She was in the basement, sorting donated clothes for a community drive. The basement was unfinished with a concrete floor and exposed pipes. It smelled like mildew and heating oil. There was a washer and dryer in one corner and stacks of cardboard boxes everywhere. I asked her about Macy's diagnosis. She gave me the same story, word for word, that she'd told me the first day. I asked if I could see medical records for the article. She said they were private, but she'd think about it. Then she asked me if I wanted to see the choir robbing room. She said it was historic, original to the building. The robing room was off the side of the sanctuary behind a narrow door. It was cramped with hooks on the walls for choir robes and a small mirror. But what caught my eye was the wall itself. It didn't look right. The room felt smaller than it should have been, based on the exterior dimensions of the building. I'm not an architect, but I've done enough fraud investigations to notice when spaces don't add up. I knocked on the back wall. It sounded hollow. Lenore was standing in the doorway watching me. She said it was just old construction, that the church had been remodeled a bunch of times over the years. I nodded and didn't push it. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Macy standing up, stretching, looking strong. I kept thinking about that wall. At around 2 a.m, I drove back to the church. I parked down the road and walked up the hill with a flashlight. The building was dark and locked, but I walked the perimeter, counting windows, measuring distances with my steps. The robing room wall was definitely off. There was a gap, maybe 4 feet wide, between the interior wall and the exterior. A hidden space. The pageant started at 7 p.m. The sanctuary was packed. Folding chairs lined the aisles and people stood in the back. There were Christmas lights strung along the walls and a sad little tree in the corner. The air smelled like wet wool and coffee. Lenore was everywhere, directing traffic, hugging donors, making sure everyone saw Macy in her wheelchair at the front. The kids performed their parts. The shepherds forgot their lines. One of the angels tripped on her costume, and everyone laughed. Then it was time for Macy to sing. Lenore wheeled her up to the microphone. The room went quiet. Macy sang Silent Night. Her voice was clear and high, almost eerily perfect. I watched the crowd. Half of them were crying. I saw people pulling out their wallets, stuffing cash into the donation basket that Lenore had set up by the door. Then, during the second verse, Macy stopped. She looked around, confused. Lenore rushed over, whispering something in her ear. Macy shook her head. Lenore's smile faltered. Then Macy said, loud enough for the front rows to hear, "I need to go to the bathroom." Lenore said she'd take her. She wheeled Macy toward the back hallway past the robing room. I waited 30 seconds, then followed. The hallway was empty. The bathroom door was open and the light was off. I heard voices coming from the robing room. I pressed my ear to the door. Lenore was hissing at Macy. "You're supposed to stay out there. You're supposed to finish the song. What's wrong with you?" Macy's voice was small. "I don't feel good." "You're fine. You're always fine. Now get back out there." I heard movement. I stepped back. The door opened and Lenore came out, pulling Macy by the arm. Macy was crying. Lenore saw me and froze. Then she plastered on that smile and said, "Macy wasn't feeling well. They were going to step outside for some air. I said I'd help." Lenore said no. Too quickly. I insisted. She looked at me for a long moment, then said fine. We went out the side door into the gravel lot. It was snowing lightly. Macy was shivering. Lenore lit a cigarette and told Macy to stop crying, that people would think something was wrong. I asked Macy if she wanted some water. She nodded. I went back inside, but instead of going to the kitchen, I went to the robing room. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside and closed it behind me. I went straight to the back wall and started feeling along the edges. There was a seam hidden behind one of the robe hooks. I pulled the hook, and a section of the wall shifted. It was a panel hinged on one side. I pulled it open. The space behind it was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide and 8 feet long. There was a sleeping bag on the floor, a battery-powered lantern, and a plastic bin full of snacks. Candy wrappers, chip bags, juice boxes. There was a handheld game console, the kind kids had in the early 2000s, and there was a bucket in the corner with a lid on it. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I pulled the panel shut and stepped back just as the door opened. It was Lenore. She wasn't smiling anymore. She said, "What are you doing in here?" I said I was looking for the water glasses. She said they were in the kitchen, not the robing room. I nodded and moved toward the door, but she blocked me. She said, "You're not a reporter, are you?" I didn't answer. She took a step closer. She was bigger than me, and she was holding something in her hand, a hammer, one of those small claw hammers from a toolkit. She said, "You need to leave. Right now." I said, "Where's Macy?" She said, Macy's fine. She's with me. She's always with me, I said. Is she in there? I pointed to the panel. Lenore's face went blank. Then she lunged. I barely got my arm up in time. The hammer glanced off my forearm and pain shot up to my elbow. I shoved her back hard and she stumbled. I yanked the panel open and shouted, "Macy, come out." There was a pause. Then I heard a small voice from inside the wall. "Is it over? Can I come out now?" Macy crawled out. She looked confused, not scared. She looked at Lenore and said, "Did I do something wrong?" Lenore was breathing hard. She said, "Get back in there. Right now." Macy hesitated. I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door. Lenore swung the hammer again, and I shoved Macy into the hallway and slammed the door shut. I heard Lenore screaming on the other side, pounding on the wood. I pulled Macy through the sanctuary, right into the middle of the pageant crowd. Everyone stopped and stared. I shouted, "Call 911. Now." Someone did. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes. Lenore tried to explain, tried to say I was crazy, that Macy had just been resting in the robing room because she was tired. But then they found the space behind the wall. They found the bucket. They found the food wrappers. They found the game console. They took Macy to the hospital that night. The doctors examined her. She didn't have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. She didn't have anything. She was malnourished and her muscles were weak from being forced to sit in a wheelchair for years. But she was healthy. She could walk. She could run. She'd just been trained not to. The investigation went deeper. They found out Lenore had been doing this for 6 years. She'd started when Macy's parents died in a car accident, and Lenore became her legal guardian. The donations, the disability checks, the fundraisers, it all added up to over $150,000. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. When they searched the church basement, they found something in one of the storage rooms. Scratches on the wall, names carved into the wood. One of them was Macy's. The other was a name I didn't recognize. A boy's name. The police traced it back. There had been another kid, years before Macy, a nephew of Lenore's. He disappeared when he was 10. The case went cold. They never found him. Lenore's in prison now. Macy's in foster care, learning to walk again, learning to live again. I finished my report and closed the case. But I still think about that space behind the wall. I think about how small it was. I think about Macy asking if the show was over, if she could come out. Like it was a game. Like hiding in the dark, in the cold, in a space the size of a coffin was just something kids did. And I think about that other name on the wall. I think about what happened to him. I think about whether he learned the game fast enough. I haven't been back to Grundy. I don't think I ever will. But every January 6th, when Old Christmas rolls around, I think about St. Jude's Methodist. I think about the radiator hissing in the cold. I think about the footsteps echoing in the empty sanctuary. And I think about the spaces between the walls.